right. Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is the history of photography with me, ImaniHadden. We are going to talk about the devastation and the rise of modern consumerism from 1930 to 1950. Make sure that my mic is on. Perfect. And let's go. My contact information. So I'm ImaniHadden Photography. My Instagram is my first name, last name, ImaniHadden. Check out some of my updated, most recent work there. There's my contact email. I'm available for career building and mentorship for high schoolers in the Antelope Valley areas. That's Lancaster and Palmdale regions. Some of my background, I have a Bachelor's of Fine Arts in Photography from Tulane University. I also hold an art minor in art history and a minor in architecture. And I am currently a personal and public event photographer, real estate photographer, and a visual artist. So some general Zoom meetings, meeting rules, and housekeeping rules. Please stay muted with your screens off. Questions at the end. There's no homework, no note taking required, no testing. So photo history timeline for this session. In the 1930s, commercial photography is used in print advertising for commercial products. So things that we consume, food, entertainment, clothing, personal hygiene products. In 1935, Eastman Kodak introduces Kodachrome, which is the color transparency film, is the first color transparency film ever to be developed. In 1942, Kodak develops Kodacolor process for making color prints from the color negatives. Color is different than the black and white, slightly in its processing, but the process of taking a picture on film, developing it, is more or less the same. In 1947, Edwin Land introduced the first instant Polaroid camera, Model 95, with a 60-second production time. In 1953, Playboy magazine runs its first issue with Marilyn Monroe's stolen nudes, and they were printed and sold 50,000 copies in its initial run. And from 1939 to 1957, over 20,000 mail order copies of Betty Page in bondage costumes were ordered across the United States of America. And these two colored lines are the timelines for World War I from 1939 to 1945, and Betty Page's timeline in taking those pictures. So there's a lot jam-packed into these 2 decades. But first, we're going to talk about the old commercial prints before the 1930s. So in the 1890s, they were primarily line drawings with text or engravings, which are 2 different forms of printmaking. In the 1900s, they were drawings and illustrations that were colored and printed. In the 1920s, they were also drawings and illustrations, more stylized to that time. Commercial photography in the 1930s, it was polished, classy, and dramatic. I chose these 3 words because it reminds me of the era in which they were developing the movie industry, film, and film with sound. So these products seem overhyped for, looks like facial cream and beer, but it was a big deal to show your products in the best light and to show the products in ways in which the people of that time would be able to relate and connect with them. So here's food. See the girl pouring Kix cereal and a woman taking a sip of Maxwell House coffee. 2 brands that are still around today. Baby products. There was a lot of baby products in this era that were being sold to mothers who were primarily in the house doing their domestic duties. And so you would want to get as many print ads to mothers as possible. Hygiene products. Betty's ready for 8-hour beauty sleep. So this is soap. It seems like these images are taken right out of image and movie stills. Some of our most expensive gowned women have BO, such a needless shame. So there's products such as deodorant being sold into these ads. Radios were also being sold. Radios were the primary way that people heard the news at that time, and they had to be sold like any other product we have today. And other forms of communication, such as the telephone. They actually had to sell telephones, like how we are sold the new iPhone this, the new BlackBerry that. And these images in and of themselves can be standalone art pieces, very dramatic. They're backlit or side lit. And it's just an average telephone, but they had to play up the drama. They had to make it look extremely interesting in order to get consumers to purchase their products. So two worlds, advertised American greatness versus impoverished reality. So two very intense timelines were going on at the time, the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl. Starting with the Great Depression, it kicked off in October of 1929, and the stock markets crashed and unemployment skyrocketed in major cities. So on the left, men lining up for a soup kitchen, and on the right, a bread line in New York City, Bryant's Park during the Great Depression. People had to rely on public and civil services in order to be fed, feed their families, and just get by on their day-to-day. The Dust Bowl. So it showed a great divide in the haves and have-nots. It was caused by a severe drought in which overcultivation had caused massive dust storms. And this happened in Texas, Colorado, the Great Plains, New Mexico, and Oklahoma primarily. And many people moved west to California for new jobs and homes. So comparing these two images, world's highest standard of living, there's no way like the American way. And migrant worker walking on a California highway. So this is extremely different than what we have today. The haves and the have-nots. There was such a huge divide where now there's more of a larger middle class. Back then, it was clear who had money and who did not have money. Photographer Alfred Einstein was in the Midwest and Upper South and took pictures of their families as they lived during the Dust Bowl. And so here's this family sharing a meal. The plates look pretty empty, but they are still grateful for the little bit that they have. Here's a woman who is farming in the Dust Bowl. At that time, they planted potatoes, carrots, string beans, and ate what meat they can afford at the time, if any. Here's pictures of their housing. It was very shabby shacks made of boards and wood. Anything that people can put together, they lived in at that time. And here's the dust encroaching on a small city, and it was massive. These dust clouds blew from the overcultivation of the land. Much of the topsoil had been farmed away, and what was left was the silt that was underneath. And when the wind blew, the dust piled up. The image from the introduction shows women with their own versions of gas masks or dust masks on. Here on the right, there is a picture of a house that has been swamped by one of these swells of dust. So these dust mounds and dust storms completely overtook houses and people had to leave. And here's an image of a car leaving with a dust swell behind it. It was a very very, very disturbing time for the people that had to live in that era. Dorothea Lange, who was part of the Resettlement Administration, later called the Farm Security Administration, was a photographer, and she took the famous migrant mother image when migrants came to California, and that image was taken in 1936. And it showed the extreme poverty that American farmers had to face. Here's also a billboard along the US 99 highway. This is taken in Kern County. It shows 3 destitute families that are camped out. And you can see the stark difference between the travel while you sleep versus the people that have to camp out in the open air. Migrant workers camps on the outskirts of Marysville, California. So many people think that California is a lush paradise. It is actually a very dry chaparral desert. And these individuals were looking for work the best way they can, wherever they can get it. They also traveled up the West Coast to Washington and Oregon on the train line. So families would hop on the train, hop off at the places that they needed to go and ask for jobs. If there was any available farming jobs, the entire family, mother, father, and all the children above the age of 3 would pick in the fields. 8 boys at Lincoln Bench School. So they were going to school outdoors. It was a very impoverished time for these children. They're in school outside. There are no desks, but they are expected to read and write. And this is in Malheur County in Oregon. So this was going on all up and down the West Coast. Families fleeing and attempting to get jobs wherever they could. And water supply, an open settling basin from the irrigation ditch in California squatter camp near Calipatria. So that is the southeastern part that abuts Arizona, Calipatria, that region in that zone. And these water ditches were used to cook, clean, and bathe. It wasn't very sanitary, but the individuals used what they had at hand. So women advertising and World War II. So women were encouraged to stay at home. There was no women fighting on the battlefield. However, they were considered soldiers without guns. Will you have a part in victory? Women were very much encouraged to be patriotic and take up some of the jobs that men had left when they were entering into World War II. So women were working on planes, working as mechanics. These are African-American women in particular. I always look to find women of color. Women of color were very much involved, and I always make sure to bring them to the forefront. Latin and Hispanic women, particularly in the states in the Southwest. So Mexican-American women working at Friedrich Refrigeration in San Antonio, Texas. You have Asian and Pacific Islander women fighting a fire. We don't really see these images, and it's important to include them. Now, women were on the battlefield technically through image, dawn of the pinup girl. I was reading how men would paint nude pinup women on the sides of the bombers. Their commanders would say, have some dignity, put some clothes on them, and the painters and illustrators would paint bras or tops on them made of watercolor. And so when the plane would take off, the woman would be dressed. If the plane landed or was shot down and parts of the plane were seen, it would be noticed that the women had no clothes on because the dissipation from the plane flying through the sky and the clouds would remove the watercolor off of the women, so they would be actually nude. Business of the pinup art in post-war era. So Gil Elvgren was a painter who put women not inside of the mechanics alley, not fighting fires, but put them back into their domestic realm, and he painted them in these pinup positions. So women playing board games, women cooking and cleaning. It'd be considered very sexist in many feminist circles today, but this is what was presented at the time. He directs Myrna Hansen. So you see him posing her hand, and he actually painted the image that's on the right from life. Hansen was presented to have been putting on her lipstick while sitting on the back of a car with a flat tire. Very interesting how men recreated women in these scenarios in which men would be needed. Men typically were needed to be mechanics and to fix cars and to change tires. And here he presents a woman not being able to fix the tire herself, as we probably would have seen in World War II times where women were working in the mechanics area, but a woman putting on her makeup. Alberto Vargas was a Peruvian illustrator who actually inspired Hugh Hefner in Playboy with his more sleek and sensuous designs. The images are very soft and pillowy. His style was very feminine, light, and delicate. And moving to Playboy, origins of pinup in Playboy magazine. I had mentioned earlier, 1953, Hugh Hefner had taken Marilyn Monroe's nude pictures that she had done before becoming famous. And when he had published them in 53 in the first issue, that really cemented the beginnings of people knowing her as a sex symbol. She was considered sexy, beautiful, attractive, but when being put into Playboy magazine, of course, fully nude, which I do not show here, it really made people go towards her for the image that we understand her to be known for today. Betty Page was also a pinup. She was the antithesis of the blonde girl next door that Marilyn Monroe was. She was naturally brunette. She was more athletic bodied. She was an aspiring film star that turned into a model. So she had originally done a few runs for film, and they said, this isn't for you. She then turned around and became a model in New York City when a police officer found her on the street and asked if he can take some pictures of her. He was an aspiring photographer, of course, with the new cameras, the new development of film. She said yes. And she was considered playful, avant-garde, and adventurous. Most female models had stuck to the more quiet poses, more static poses. You see here, she's hanging from a branch. She's falling over in a wave. She's looking over her shoulder. She's engaging with the camera. It's not very shy, like the pinup drawings, paintings, and illustrations before. Not very coy either. She also got a hold of Irving Klaw, or maybe he got a hold of her, depending on how you see it, and other videographers made over 20,000 images of Page in BDSM attire. So this sort of kink or fetish was very much consumed and it sold out on the underground adult entertainment circuit. So wherever you can find naughty magazines in the 1950s, you were able to see Claw's photography work of Betty Page tied up, ball and gag, being spanked, and also whipping. It was very much considered taboo because America had these very wholesome Christian values. How could someone privately consume this media? What did that mean? What did that mean for American values? What did that mean for the American people? That they have one face to the public and privately they are consuming BDSM imagery. And I chose these images because she is fully clothed. The majority of the images, Paige and other women, and even some men, were nude and interacting with each other in this sort of BDSM fashion. So to keep it PG-13, I chose all the images where Paige is clothed. Paige left the modeling industry suddenly after senators lobbied against Claw's content. This was due to a fact that a boy was found dead hanging in a bondage-style rope. So the rope that was tying up Paige in a previous image, a boy was found hanging from the rafters, I believe, of his garage, and senators called for the immediate discontinuation of Claw producing this imagery. Betty Page left. She stopped modeling. She had a quite normal life. People did recognize her, but it was more like a passing in the street. Was that Betty Page? Because no one dared expose themselves as to knowing Betty Page was in the BDSM photography magazines. No one wanted to be connected with that. So there was many silent acknowledgments that that was Betty Page. And she pretty much lived on her life quietly until Hugh Hefner reached out to her towards the end of her life and got her an agent so that she can start making money or royalties off of her original imagery. So in the 80s and 90s, there was a Betty Page mania resurgence. People were making buttons and mugs. People were making original paintings of putting her in sexy devil costumes. They had her dressed as burlesque and figurines. And of course, they made comic books, many comic books of Betty Page in these Jungle Woman, sexy Jane and Tarzan scenarios. That was very much a popular thing that they affixed her image to. She said that she didn't mind. She, towards the end of her life, said, "I'm an old lady now. Whatever they do with the images, they do. I was in my youth. I was having fun. I was enjoying myself. If they want to have Betty Page mania for the next forever till the end of time, I guess so be it." She was open to people repopularizing her image. So taking a step back, would female Instagram and YouTube influencers exist without early objectification? I thought myself, no, I don't think they would. Here is Katia Elise Henry. She is a fitness trainer and fitness model with her own brand of fitness clothing. And on Instagram, she has 7.9 million followers. That's a lot of people. That is a lot of people. And I love Serahi. She is a makeup artist and she has 1.16 million subscribers on her YouTube makeup channel. So people are consuming her image. People are consuming Miss Henry's image, whether or not it is because they are beautiful, young, attractive, fit, we don't know, but they do monetize on the fact that they are offering services and products and tutorials on how to better makeup skills or to better your bodily physique. So here's my sources for this session. And next week, we'll be talking about counterculture and the youth. So there's a lot of uprisings, a lot of social unrest in the 1960s and 70s for many major groups. So I'm going to talk about that next week. And any questions about this session? You can unmute yourselves.
Yeah, I've got a question, or maybe it's a comment. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. It seems to me like a lot of the art was more like a poster, was more poster style than photos.
Yes.
Am I just misreading that? It seems like a lot of what was out there that you talked about in this session was more, it seemed like there's a lot of it appeared to be like posters or covers of magazines. The photos was used in that format. Is that my correct? Is that a correct reading on that?
Yes, they started off as paintings and illustrations because these men, a lot of men who were taking these images or wanted to take such imagery were shunned. A lot of women would say, no, I consider that pornographic. That's against my morals. That's against my values. And so men will go, okay, we still have painting. We still have illustration. These men are painting them on the sides of planes. We can commercialize this. And so the first commercialization was paintings and illustrations. Let me start my video. Paintings and illustrations. And then it slowly turned to breaking that barrier with actually using photography.
Okay.
Any other questions? Comments?
So how did Hugh Hefner again factor into this era of photography? Because I was trying to get clarification on him. Did he use photography in any way, or how did he? Because I know he did Playboy magazine, but is that the photographic side of Hugh, or how did photo play into what he was all about?
He originally was attempting to get women to take their clothes off. Playboy, for those that don't know, is a nude magazine taking pictures of women and publishing them for men and women or people to consume. And when he was first starting off, there was a lot of women that didn't want to break that barrier. They didn't want to be known as the woman in the nude magazine. And he had taken advantage of the fact that Marilyn Monroe was on the come up in the movie industry, and that he had found some nudes or gotten a hold of some nudes that she had taken nude images. And he said, she's on the come up. People are going to want to see her. I'm going to take her image, put it in my magazine, publish. And so he started that. And a lot of women later came as it became more popularized to have tasteful nudes where the breast, genitals, the behind, the buttocks is covered. So a lot of women agreed to do Playboy, but with those sorts of caveats. I don't want to be fully nude. I want a fur throw over me. I want a piece of linen over me. I want to be behind a screen with my legs peeking out. So a lot of people made these sorts of altering to the typical nude image, but they didn't want to be the first one, just in case it kind of backfired, or in case Hugh Hefner went to jail. I mean, many people did try to say that what he was doing was bad, but he always said, hey, these are consenting adults, consenting women. They do this, they agree to, they do this because they want to. And so he, what he did was technically illegal. You can't take someone's image and reproduce it without consent. But because I think at the time she was on the come up, she just went, okay, it's press. You know, I'm trying to be a sex symbol. And so I'm in Playboy as a sex symbol. I'm an actress who's also a sex symbol. I'm getting these roles. And so she used it as press. Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any more questions? Comments? Anything you found interesting?
So what you showed tonight is definitely a far cry from weeks 1, 2, and 3.
Yes. Yeah.
It's,
The
yeah,
Victorian great grandmothers would be very upset.
yes.
Yeah, very. It was. I picked the most clothed bathing suit, lingerie pictures, but it was a lot of nude imagery. I had to censor the women on the sides of the bombers, so when I put this on YouTube, I don't get taken down. I don't get my page flagged for sharing technically pornography on YouTube, even though this is an historical retelling. But yeah, it was very different. And it's still it's still a thing today. We have Instagram models that wear all sorts of different clothing with cutouts. We consider very sexy, and yet they say no, this isn't sexy. This isn't me trying to be sexy. This is just me sharing the product. This is me sharing this brand. Can't really name any of them, but there's many brands that are very popular on the internet, and they use people that are famous or influencers to sell their clothing and their products. And I really do link it to the origins of pinup.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Anybody else? Let's see if I can escape. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming to this session. Next week, counterculture and the youth in the 1960s and 70s. Thank you very much for attending. I'll see you next week.